Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Fairweather Fan Podcast. My name is Anthony Corby, and today I am going to be going over, the main topic for today is obviously going to be the NBA trade deadline, which is tomorrow, probably at around 24 hours after the time this is uploading, a little bit before that. But I'm also going to be I'm going to be bringing this up again about the Flyers. Are they buyers or sellers at the NHL trade deadline this year? And then finally, I'm going to talk about what message NASCAR is sending to its fans and people that just watch the sport and pay attention to the sport in general. What message are they sending by not suspending Noah Gragson for the incident at Atlanta the other day? But first things first, we got our first subscriber on YouTube the other day. And after the first few videos didn't get any views, we're up to 2 or 3 views now per video. I think the most recent one, let me just make sure that I'm being factually correct. The first podcast got 1 view. It was probably me. Second one got 0 views. The disappointment video got 2. And then the last podcast got 3 views. So we're getting there. 4 videos in and we're already at 3 views. And it's going to take a while to get a lot more, I know, but we're getting there. And so, just requires patience, I guess. But anyway, let's get started. Philadelphia 76ers, what moves should they make at the trade deadline this year? And so the way I'm going to break this down is I'm going to focus on the Sixers' perspective first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the players that they could get. So, in my eyes, there are 3 tiers of players or items that are available. Those you do not give up for any reason, those that you might consider giving up for 2 players. So, like, if the Sixers trade, for Lonzo Ball and JJ Redick, who might they give up, in exchange for getting that extra piece in JJ Redick to come off the bench? And then who are you willing to give up? Like, which players are you, 100% willing to give up? And so, I think the hardest way to distinguish between 2 of these are the players that you're willing to give up and then might consider, but, I advise strongly against giving them up unless you get, like I said, 2 pieces in return or, somehow are still able to win the trade by giving up these guys, but it would be a really difficult trade to make. So, players you don't give up. These are pretty straightforward. You don't give up Embiid, obviously. He's the star player, league MVP. You don't give up Simmons, even though they were talking about trading Simmons early in the year. I don't think you give him up at this point. He's struggled recently, but his defense has really been helping this team recently. I mean, not counting the third quarter of the Warriors game, his defense has been really, really good. And even though he struggled offensively, you still don't give him up for anybody. Tobias Harris, that goes without saying. I think he's still in, he's still got 4 years or 3 years left of that max contract. So I don't even know if anybody would take that deal. And I know the Sixers wouldn't be willing to give him up. Shake Milton. So Milton has struggled recently, but he's also kind of a key piece. He made a good case for himself earlier in the year for 6th man of the year. But then he got injured and he struggled a little bit since that. So still don't give him up. He's still got promise. He'll return to form. Seth Curry returned to form after his after he got COVID. So it's going to take a little bit, but then I think Milton's going to return to form. Hopefully sometime in the next week or so. Because you can't blow a 24-point lead to the Warriors every night and then expect to still win that game by double digits. Paul Reed. They're not going to give up Paul Reed. This guy is going to be, I think, one of the best guards in the NBA in a few years. And I think, the Sixers would be stupid to trade him. I mean, not only was he rookie of the year in the G League, but he was the league MVP too. And so they've called him up, and he's gotten a few baskets so far. He's still kind of like a third-tier player. They're kind of keeping him on the bench. But, he's one of those guys that comes in the blowout games. But I think next year, he could definitely be kind of a second-tier guy. A guy that plays every game. I mean, we'll have to see. We'll have to see who they trade away and who they retain in free agency and all that good stuff. But Paul Reed, I think, is going to be one of the best guards in the NBA one day. They just got to keep him. And then Dwight Howard. They're not going to trade Dwight Howard. He's kind of their backup center regardless now. And that's it. That's the entire list for the guys that I say you absolutely do not give up. So think about some of the players that I haven't mentioned. And now I'm going to try to break those down into two different categories. So I've got in the category don't give up. You don't give up Embiid. You don't give up Simmons, Tobias Harris, Shake Milton, Paul Reed, Dwight Howard. Now, players you're willing to give up. Players whose names have, first of all, players whose names have been mentioned in trade talks. And then players whose names haven't been mentioned. And I'm actually going to make an adjustment here because I actually wrote this before last night. But I put Tony Bradley in the list of players you should be willing to give up. Not anymore. Last night he bought out. So I'm going to put him up in the might consider for two players category. But also one of the players that hasn't been mentioned is Isaiah Joe, who was promising, and a lot of Sixers fans like Isaiah Joe, but he hasn't really been performing as of late. So if your motto is win now, if you can give up Isaiah Joe and get Lonzo Ball or Kyle Lowry in return, that's a good deal. So that's one of the guys that has been mentioned. The guys who have been mentioned: Tyrese Maxey, Mike Scott, draft picks, and most of the lower end of the bench. Those guys could definitely be given up. I know we talk a lot about prospects, who the Sixers could, trade to a rebuilding team like the Pelicans. I mean, the Pelicans are supposed to be good, but they're not, so they're technically still rebuilding. Or the Raptors, who are looking to basically build a new core, after DeMar DeRozan left, after Kawhi Leonard left. Now they're looking to get rid of their franchise player, Kyle Lowry, obviously, and the Sixers are in the mix for him. So I think that the Raptors would definitely take some combination of Tyrese Maxey, Mike Scott, obviously draft picks, and then most of the lower end of the bench, the young guys on the end of the bench that usually don't play unless there's like a blowout going on and the Sixers are winning by 30 in the fourth quarter, going into fourth quarter, or even 20, honestly. And then the players that you might consider in exchange for two players. And so I was thinking about this in the sense that, who would you give up for both Lonzo Ball and JJ Redick? And this is a difficult topic. So I put on this list Matisse Thybulle, Seth Curry, Furkan Korkmaz, Danny Green, and now Tony Bradley. Now I'm going to try to talk about each player one by one, and what deals would make sense. I'll try to craft ideas that'll make sense for trades. So Thybulle is excellent defensively, but we all know that the NBA is a very offensive league. The Nets right now are probably the best team in the league, and they have no defense. And they're winning without KD and Kyrie, actually. Last night, they beat the Blazers on the road without KD or Kyrie. That kind of goes up there. I mean, yeah, they have Blake Griffin. That kind of goes up there with our Bucks loss. We barely lost to the Bucks in overtime on a back-to-back without our star player. Like, the Nets, they're a good team. And I hate to admit it, but they're a good team. And so, if you're going to trade Thibault, you should get some guys in return, but obviously defense doesn't matter as much anymore because Kyrie and KD and James Harden, those guys are pretty much automatic. So in a 4-game series, you're going to have to beat them offensively somehow. And Simmons is great on defense. And I think that could definitely play to the advantage of the Sixers. And, Embiid's good on defense as well. Obviously, a big rebounder. Dwight Howard recently, I mean, the monster block that he had the other night on Julius Randle, my God. That was crazy. That made, all the NBA highlights. But yeah, and then you've got, you've definitely already got defense there, and I guess Matisse Thybulle is really, a really good defensive piece, and I hope they don't give him up. But I definitely wouldn't trade him for Lowry or Lonzo Ball alone. He's so good defensive. I think, if they gave him more minutes, he would be a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. The amount of blocks that this guy's had this year has been insane. And I think offensively he could step up as well. But if you're talking about winning now, I would definitely package Thibault in with probably Maxey, Mike Scott, and some draft picks in order to get Lonzo Ball and JJ Redick, if that's the way the Pelicans go. And we'll see if they accept that trade. I mean, they might. I mean, Maxey's a really good player as well. Mike Scott is pretty good. They're also pretty young. I mean, Mike Scott's a little bit older than Maxey and Thibault, but, generally that would definitely help the Pelicans build their core up. And so that's 4 things that they'd be getting in exchange for Lonzo Ball and JJ Redick to come off the bench. And just imagine how deep that bench would be. We'll get to that in a bit, but that would be a really, really just absolutely loaded bench. And then Seth Curry. It's difficult with Seth Curry because he's been kind of getting back to form as of lately. He had that ankle injury, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, or about a week ago. But before that, he was getting really back to where he was before COVID. And so his 3-point percentage has been going up. I know he had that game a while ago where we were all thinking, oh, they should definitely trade this guy if they can, where he shot 0 for 10 or 0 for 12 or something from 3. But since that game, I mean, he's really been stepping it up. And the Sixers have needed him. And so getting those 3-point buckets has been huge. But again, he could definitely also be another guy who's packaged in for JJ Redick and Lonzo Ball. And I mean, JJ Redick is not as good defensively, but he was a reliable 3-point shooter for the Sixers. That lineup offensively back in 2019 that was, where it was Simmons, Redick, Butler, Harris, Embiid. JJ Redick was their main guy for shooting. And you definitely need that. And they almost won with that lineup. I mean, could you imagine those guys? They would have gone to the NBA Finals if they won that series. And so if you can get a shooter like JJ Redick back and have him on the bench, I mean, because, again, I'll talk about starting lineups in a second, but you get Lonzo Ball, and then his substitution or Simmons' substitution is JJ Redick? That would be great for them. And then Furkan Korkmaz and Danny Green, we've been yelling about them all season, but they're still pretty good players. I don't see a 1-for-1 deal happening, or even a 2-for-1 deal happening with either of them, where the Sixers aren't losing that trade. Well, I mean, I guess if you trade Green for Ball, then yeah, that would be a huge win for the Sixers, but I don't see, I mean, they've been clutch for the Sixers the last couple of weeks. I mean, Furkan hit that game-tying 3, and he's also had over 15 points a game for at least the last couple of games, not including last night. I don't know what he finished with last night. And then Danny Green came up clutch in that overtime against the Knicks, and then in regulation as well. He's been finding his stride lately as well. So, like, I don't know what he finished with yesterday, though. I know he was 2 for 6 at some point. His game works for him when, show me previous games. Man, I'm trying to find the score. His game works for him when he's actually hitting threes. When he's missing everything, that's really just detrimental to the 76ers in trying to win. And now I can't find this game. There we go. I'm trying to find one simple box score. Oh, wait, no, that's the wrong one. I hit the Knicks game. And now I gotta go all the way back down. But, I mean, Green is in the playoffs. Danny Green, if he stays on the Sixers, is going to be a really key piece for them. Like, it's going to be the difference between winning in or beating Brooklyn and losing in the second round again. Like, that's how important Danny Green is. He finished with 11 points, by the way. 4 for 9, 3 for 8 from 3. That's actually pretty good. 11 points, 2 rebounds, 1 assist. No steals or blocks yesterday. That's kind of surprising. He's usually recording one of those two. But if they keep Danny Green and he's cold in the playoffs, like he was in the last playoffs with the Lakers, he was kind of cold. I don't think that the Sixers even are going to match up against the Nets. Like, that's supposed to be the favorite right now, but the Sixers, I don't think, with the team they have right now, they're not getting that first seed. With the way the Nets are playing. And when KD and Kyrie come back, that's going to be a completely different animal. And the Sixers are going to have to go up against that animal at some point later in the season. But those guys, Furkan Korkmaz and Danny Green, they've been really clutch for the Sixers, so I don't think you give them up. I wouldn't even like you don't give them up for one player. You don't give them up for just Kyle Lowry or just Lonzo Ball. Like, you have to give them up. If you're giving up one of those players, it has to be for 2 players. Like, maybe a 3-team trade, I don't know. I mean, I think that the 2 major trades that the Sixers are talking about right now are getting Lonzo Ball or Kyle Lowry. And if you go for 2 players, you're getting Lonzo Ball and JJ Redick. And if you go for Kyle Lowry, apparently they want to see if they can get Lowry and DeMar DeRozan in a 3-team trade. So, I guess sending guys to San Antonio and then sending other guys to Toronto in exchange for getting both of them in the same place. At least that's been the talk on NBA Twitter. I have no idea if that'll actually happen. But, I mean, Lowry's pricey enough. I think that the best bet for the Sixers right now is to go after Lonzo Ball and, if possible, JJ Redick. And so, who would you give up for those guys? My ideal trade would be Matisse Thybulle, Seth Curry, Tyrese Maxey, and then a bunch of draft picks. If you get those 2 guys in return, long term, it's not a good trade. If you think the Sixers can be competitive long term, the problem is Embiid is 27 now. I don't know how old Simmons is. He's up there as well. Ben Simmons is 24, so he's got a bit more time. But Embiid probably has 4 or 5 more years until he starts to decline. Unless he's like Tim Duncan. I mean, he wears 21, so he might be. But you know, Embiid's production is not always going to be where it is. And he's had 3 monster seasons in a row now where he's been an MVP candidate, going back to the 2018-19 season. Last year, he was great. This year, he was the front runner for MVP until he got injured. And now it's kind of up for grabs. I still think Jokic is going to win it, and he probably deserves it with the amount of time that Embiid's going to be out. We'll see. I still think that Embiid is the best player in the league. He's definitely the most valuable player to his team. Even though they're winning without him now, somehow they're winning kind of these games that, they should be winning. I mean, with the exception of the Knicks, because the Knicks are good now. But before that, I mean, if you remember back to that game they dropped against Detroit, they lost that wildly without Embiid, and that was insane. So like, you've got to produce. Basically, you've got to produce now. You've got to win a championship in either this year or next year for the Sixers. And they had a chance in 2019. They almost did it in 2019. If it wasn't for that damn Kawhi Leonard buzzer beater, they would have won the title that year if they won that game in overtime. This is the moment for the Sixers, because I anticipate probably not 5 years down the line, but around 10 years down the line, they're going to be rebuilding again. Somewhere between 5 to 10 years down the line, but probably not. Probably on the later end of that, they're going to be rebuilding again. And you just hope they're as successful as before. But these next 2 to 3 years, that's when your championship window is open. So the trade deadline is 3 o'clock tomorrow. Most of the major trades are probably going to be announced shortly after that, or either shortly before that or shortly after that. I know with the MLB, it's usually like the trade deadline is at 4 o'clock, I think. And then all the trades come in shortly after that. Like, you hear little rumors and stuff. Excuse me. But you don't, like, actually hear that the trades went through or they're official until afterwards. And so I remember in 2019, on the day of the MLB trade deadline, July 31st, I was standing outside Citizens Bank Park with a bunch of other Philly fans right before they played the San Francisco Giants. And we found out, like, literally before we were let in the stadium, it was me, and then 2 other guys, and we were talking about all the trades that were happening, and Zach Greinke got traded to the Astros, and Corey Dickerson got traded to the Phillies, and we were like, we watched everything happen live. That was a really crazy experience. Like, not watching the coverage, but like being outside of a baseball game while all these trades are happening, trades that concern your team, like guys on the other end of that gate are making trades. Calls are flying, stuff like that. That was a crazy experience, I'll say that. Anyway, let's move on now. This is probably going to be a shorter podcast than usual. The Philadelphia Flyers. Are the Flyers buyers or sellers at this year's NHL trade deadline? And I brought this up in a podcast a few weeks ago. The Islanders game throws this into question, and so does the Devils game. I mean, the Devils game, basically what you had was the tale of 2 losses. A good loss and a bad loss. And the Devils were a bad loss. And I know they were playing on a back-to-back. I don't care that they scored 2 goals late. They lost that game 4-1 in my eyes. I mean, anytime that you go down 3 goals, the game with like 20 minutes left to play, unless you're the Boston Bruins playing the Toronto Maple Leafs at TD Garden, that game is pretty much over. So the Islanders game really throws this into question, particularly because they actually played a complete game that day. And so I think that Shane Gostisbehere needs to go regardless if Chuck Fletcher knows what he's doing. My answer, which was my answer a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, I think that podcast was released. My answer is that the Flyers are still sellers. Unless they win, what do they have, 4 games left this month? My original goal that I wanted them to meet was for them to get 14 of 18 points, or at least 13 of 18. They're not going to get that unless, no matter what, they're not going to get that. The maximum they can get is 12 of 18 in that stretch. And that's only if they win the next 4 games. But they're playing the Rangers twice. They lost 9-0 to the Rangers, so you never really know what's going to happen. And then they play the Sabres, but at least one of those games is going to be a kind of a trap game. And yeah, that actually is a trap game because the Sabres suck a lot worse than we do. But remember, we lost 6-1 to the Sabres earlier this year. So I'm not optimistic that Matthias Ekholm is going to change the way that they play the game. If they get Ekholm, he'll replace one defensive hole, but there are 5 others. This team isn't making the playoffs no matter who they get. Unless they make a trade, apparently the Oilers can make it work with just 2 guys running their team. So if you can somehow get Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, then maybe you have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. But that's not going to happen. Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl aren't going anywhere. So the Flyers, they're not making the playoffs. They're sellers at the deadline for sure. They need to tank. They need to hope to get a high draft pick, and even if they don't, they need to draft a defenseman with their draft pick, with their first round draft pick. They need to draft a defenseman. Offense isn't really the problem. It's mostly defense. And even the offensive core, they've turned the puck over a lot recently. Even Farabee last night, I was surprised. Farabee turned the puck over twice, and one of them, I think, led to a shorthanded or like a breakaway goal. So, yeah, I'm not optimistic. They're definitely sellers. And I did a live stream on Instagram yesterday, and I talked a little bit more about which Philly sports team has a chance to win a championship in the next 12 months. Like, what are the ratings? Flyers are 4th now on that list. They've dropped all the way down. I would go Sixers, Phillies, Union, because Union, are going to choke in the playoffs again. They do it every year except for 2019. And then below the Union, then you have the Flyers, and then some high school JV team somewhere winning the Super Bowl, and then the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. The Eagles are 6th out of the 5 teams because they're just so bad. And nothing is going to change that. But anyway, let's move on. Last topic now. Noah Gragson. What message is NASCAR sending to its fans by not suspending Noah Gragson? Here's a message that they're sending. Racing dirty is allowed. Endangering pit crew members is allowed. Harming or potentially harming somebody, that's fine. That's what they're saying by not suspending Noah Gragson. They're saying that you can race dirty, you can race bad, you can be a bad driver. He is a bad driver. I don't care how he finishes. I don't care if he almost gets in championship 4 before he forgets how to drive a car and Harrison Burton passes him. He wrecks his car almost every race. If he wasn't in JR Motorsports equipment, he would suck. He would. You can't even deny that. He's in the wall every race, whether it's his fault or not his fault. Like I said, the David Starr incident, that wasn't quite his fault. Some of the other incidents this season, they weren't quite his fault. But when you're winding up in the wall every race, come on now. That car always is scratched up. He doesn't know how to drive. He can't run the wall. I mean, watch that guy at Homestead, Miami. He scrapes the wall on literally every turn. And then he gets a flat tire and wonders why. He's bad. That's why. He's a bad driver. And anybody that says otherwise is kidding themselves. He sucks. And I'm frankly shocked that he wasn't suspended. I mean, come on now. Let's be realistic. Like, they were showing that top angle, which made it look slower, that he slowly was backing up toward Hemrick in order to pit. But even if that's true, don't you get a fine for that? Don't you get a fine for endangering pit crew members, even if it's accidental? I mean, hell, they suspend crew chiefs and entire pit crew members, for not passing inspection, even when the pit crew members are trying their best to make their car good enough that they can still pass inspection. So you can suspend those guys, but you can't suspend the guy for backing up into another driver? Come on now. That's ridiculous. That should have at least been a fine. Even if you don't suspend them, hell, I would have been fine with it. Seeing that other angle. Maybe it wasn't a suspension. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But how that isn't a fine? That's insane. That is insane to me how that wasn't a fine. But anyway, that's all for this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening or watching. My social media is at FairweatherFan. That's spelled Fairweather and then PHAN. Website is FairweatherFan, spelled the same way, .weebly.com. Yes, I still have that Weebly link. Next time I see you, Sixers may be front runners for the East. Or at least closer to the Nets in being front runners for the East. I guess we'll see what they do with the deadline. I'm going to try to do a live stream tomorrow on my YouTube channel. If you're listening on Spotify or Anchor or something, then that link, you can go to that through the website, and then the website will direct you to the YouTube page. So I'm going to try to do a live stream for that, a live reaction. I'm going to try to start it at 2 o'clock. The deadline is at 3. So I expect it will go from 2 to around 3:30. Unless there's like a really late move that the Sixers make or something like that. But if they don't make a late move, then I'm not going to milk it and try to get to 3:30. But it should end sometime between 3 and 3:30. But anyways, thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you next time on the Fairweather Fan Podcast.